So I began our whole discussion of American civilization and culture by pointing to what is instrumental to human good and flourishing, and that is that whoever leads a political community must lead that political community with its common good in mind. And Aristotle tells us, right, that if the one does that, that one is kingly. If the few do that, that few are wise and loving of their neighbors. If the many can do that, they do that within a constitutional framework. But in each of these cases, whether it's the one ruling, the few ruling, or the many, they have to set aside their individual advantage and they have to take up the duty of tending towards the common good. So I've mentioned a first American Revolution. This democratic revolution is finding its way all over the globe, according to Tocqueville. And it finds its way to an American shore, much like it finds its way to Europe. But Tocqueville says there's something about America that is different. There's something about American democracy that is different than the democratic revolution taking place in other places. And the main difference is this, that in America, you could have both a moral dependence upon God and an embrace of political independence of new institutions. So kind of this balancing of tradition and the embrace of moral absolutes, and yet a willingness to allow for the exercise of liberty. Nowhere do we see this more at play, according to our next author, Weems, who writes of the character of Washington, than in the person of George Washington. Washington, more than anything else, wanted to be an exemplar of what it meant to be American. And what that meant to him was, on the one hand, being morally astute, but on the other hand, paying deference to the liberty of his neighbor. Right? This definition of what a great statesman is. A great statesman leads another as they would like to have been led. Now, Washington, very much a fan of Rome and all things Rome, had one character in mind as he kind of figured out just how he would play the part of an American leader and define what it meant to be an American. And that was of the Roman commander Cincinnatus. Now, Cincinnatus may be an individual that you've never heard of in Roman history, but you've heard of the city of Cincinnati that is named after this society of Cincinnati that Washington founded of former soldiers in the Revolutionary War. Who was Cincinnatus? Cincinnatus was a great Roman general who at a very young age established himself as kind of the leader of the Roman Republic. But then, surprisingly to everyone, he retires and he goes off to his farm and he goes on to the business of being a private citizen until Rome once again is threatened by its neighbors, and Roman leaders go out and call Cincinnatus and say, Cincinnatus, you have to lead us once again. And Cincinnatus is reticent. He says, you can find other people to lead you now. I've done my part. I am now playing the part of a private citizen. They go back and forth until they finally offer to Cincinnatus, listen, if you come back and lead us, we will make you dictator of Rome, and your children thereafter, your descendants thereafter, will always be dictators of Rome. And Cincinnatus says, you don't understand Rome. I didn't fight so that I could become all powerful while I was living and hand that power off to my children. I fought for Rome because I believed in Rome. And for that example of Cincinnatus is exactly what Washington is thinking of when he's thinking of how he can assume the presidency, do so in a way that shows all other Americans that no matter whether you're a governor or a president or a mayor, whatever power that you've been granted, you ought not to employ that power to hold it over people. You ought to try to employ it in a way for a limited amount of time where you're held responsible by another authority outside of yourself. And for Washington, that authority was the morality found within the Christian religion itself. The duty that we have as human beings to judge our actions based upon whether or not they glorify God or not. And if they don't, we ought to feel ashamed of our actions. But if they do, if we show in all of our relationships with others that we see ourselves as equals before the eyes of God, then we can operate rightly and we can lead rightly. So it's a wonderful thing an amazing thing, a gift to us, that we have a Declaration of Independence, that we're able to formulate an idea as to why our nation came into being. It's also an incredible thing that we have a federal constitution and we have a set of Federalist Papers that make the case for that federal constitution, how power is divided between the national and the state level, how power is divided within federal government. But at the end of the day, a Declaration of Independence and a Constitution are nothing unless the people that embody these roles have the character to make the thing work. You see, a republic takes Republicans. And if we learn anything from our examination of the late 18th century experience, is that what makes the Second American Revolution so successful is something that was held in Washington's character that he hoped to share with others. And we're going to see a change that takes place as we move further afield from this founding, as we move into the 19th century, where other things begin to influence our character. But at least for a time, there was a Washington who stood large, who was captured by Weems in his stories of Washington, that could be an exemplar for the American people.